I found my husband's text, "Can't wait for the weekend." The cabin, wine, and that pink lace set. I froze. When he left for his business trip, I drove to our lake house instead. "Welcome," I said as they walked in. "We've prepared wine, chairs. And the revenge begins." Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. My name is Audrey. I'm 38 years old, and for most of my adult life, I thought I had it all figured out. By day, I was the chief financial officer of a major architectural firm in Seattle. It was a demanding job, full of long hours and high stakes, but I was good at it. I understood numbers, they were logical, predictable. They didn't lie. My salary was more than comfortable, and I took a quiet pride in knowing that the life Preston and I lived, the beautiful house, the nice cars, the vacations, was built primarily on the back of my hard work. This life was centered around my husband, Preston. We were college sweethearts. I still remember the day I met him, at a crowded university football game. He had this easy smile that made his eyes crinkle at the corners, and a laugh that could make you forget all your worries. He was magnetic. We were the kind of couple everyone looked at and said, "They're going to make it." And for a long time, I believed them. We'd been together for 15 years, married for 10. We lived in a beautiful modern house in a quiet Seattle suburb, the kind with floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist furniture that looks great in magazines but always feels a little cold, a little empty when you're the only one in it. But lately, that coldness wasn't just in the furniture. It had seeped into the very bones of our marriage. The easy laughter we used to share had been replaced by a quiet, heavy silence. Our dinners were the worst part. I'd come home, exhausted from a 12-hour day of budget meetings and forecasting, and try to make something nice. Last Tuesday, for instance, I'd made salmon with roasted asparagus, his favorite. I set the table, lit a candle, and waited. He came home an hour late, tossing his keys in the bowl by the door without a word. "Hey, you," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "Rough day?" "The usual," he said, loosening his tie as he sat down. He pulled out his phone before he even picked up his fork. I tried to start a conversation. "We landed the new museum contract today. It's a huge win for the firm. The numbers were tight, but I made it work." "That's great, honey," he mumbled, his thumb swiping across his screen. A small, private smile touched his lips, a smile that wasn't for me. "It means I'll probably get that bonus we were talking about," I pressed on, a little desperately. "We could finally fix the back deck." "Aha. Cool." And that was it. The conversation died. We ate in silence, the only sounds the clinking of our silverware and the faint, tinny buzz of whatever video was playing on his phone. It felt like I was having dinner with a polite and handsome stranger who just happened to sleep in my bed. I tried to tell myself it was normal. Couples who've been together this long fall into routines, right? The initial spark fades, and you're left with a comfortable, familiar companionship. But this didn't feel comfortable. It felt profoundly lonely. The business trips started about a year ago. At first, they were occasional. Last-minute trip to Portland, have to close a deal, he'd announce, already packing a bag. I'd wish him luck, kiss him goodbye, and feel a pang of pride for my ambitious husband. But then they became more frequent. Almost every other weekend was a client seminar, a team-building retreat, or a conference. The excuses were always plausible, always just reasonable enough to make me feel like a paranoid, nagging wife for even questioning them. So I'd spend my weekends alone in our big, silent house, wandering from room to room, the silence pressing in on me. I'd tell myself not to be foolish. He was just working hard. But the little things, the tiny inconsistencies, kept piling up like stones in my pocket, weighing me down. He started taking his phone into the shower, placing it on the little tiled shelf, something he'd never done in all our years together. He changed the password on his laptop. When I asked him for it one day to look up a recipe, he hesitated. "Oh, it's complicated. I'll just type it in for you." And his eyes, the way he looked at me had changed. It was no longer with the warmth and affection I'd built my life around. Now, he'd glance past me, his focus a million miles away, like I was part of the furniture he'd long since grown tired of looking at. I felt invisible. And for a woman who commanded boardrooms and managed multi-million-dollar accounts, feeling invisible in my own home was a slow, creeping kind of poison. I was losing myself, and I didn't even know how to fight back. The beginning of the end wasn't a huge, screaming fight. It wasn't a dramatic confession or a piece of earth-shattering evidence found in a coat pocket. It was much quieter, much simpler than that. It was just a text preview on a locked screen. It was a Tuesday morning, just like any other. I was up at 6, the sky still a bruised purple outside our bedroom window. Preston was still sound asleep, a lump under the duvet. I went through my morning routine on autopilot: shower, get dressed, head to the master bathroom to do my makeup. I was standing at the sink, the buzz of my electric toothbrush filling the silence, when I saw his iPhone light up on the marble countertop next to me. He must have left it there after his shower last night. A message popped up from a name I didn't recognize. Valerie. The preview was short, but it was enough. It was more than enough. Can't wait for the weekend. The cabin wine and that pink lace set. I'm counting the hours. I froze. The toothbrush stilled in my hand, the buzzing stopped, and the silence in the room was suddenly deafening. Foam dissolved in my mouth, tasting bitter. My bare feet, which had been comfortable on the heated tile floor just a second before, were suddenly ice-cold. It felt like the blood had drained out of my entire body. Behind the frosted glass door of the shower, I could hear the water running. I could hear Preston humming softly to himself, some tune from the radio. He was getting ready for his day, getting ready to lie to my face about a client seminar, like it was just another Tuesday. And in that moment, the world didn't just tilt. It shattered. It wasn't shock I felt. Not really. I think a part of me had known, had been waiting for this. It was confirmation. A cold, hard, sickening confirmation of every doubt, every whisper of paranoia I'd been trying to silence for months. The late-night business trips. The guarded phone. The distant eyes. It all clicked into place, forming a picture so ugly and clear it took my breath away. The cabin was our lake house, my sanctuary. The wine was the expensive kind he knew I loved. And the pink lace set. I didn't even want to think about that. I stood there, toothbrush clutched in my hand like a weapon, staring at the screen as it faded to black. I didn't need to unlock the phone. I didn't need to see any more. The damage was done. In that single sentence, I saw it all: the intimacy, the shared secrets, the future they were planning while I was busy running our household and managing the investments that paid for it all. I spat the toothpaste into the sink and rinsed my mouth, my movements stiff and robotic. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. My face was pale, my eyes wide with a pain so deep it felt ancient. I had to compose myself. I couldn't let him see. I washed my face with cold water, dried my hands, and did my makeup just like I always did. The familiar routine was a lifeline. Foundation, mascara, a touch of blush. A mask. My hands didn't even tremble. Instead, a strange, terrifying emptiness settled over me, as if I had just stepped out of my own life and was watching a movie about some other poor woman. When I walked out of the bathroom, Preston was standing in front of the bedroom mirror, tying his tie. He glanced at me in the reflection and smiled, that same easy, handsome smile he gave me every morning. He had no idea he was smiling at a stranger. "Big day today," he said, adjusting his collar. "Just a reminder, this weekend, I have that client seminar in Portland. I'll be home late on Sunday." The lie was so effortless, so smooth. I just nodded, my voice a flat, dead thing. Don't forget a warm coat. It gets cold there at night. He had no idea that I knew Portland was a lie. He had no idea I knew about the cabin, the wine, or the pink lace. I didn't ask a single question. I didn't want to interrupt the carefully scripted performance he'd put so much effort into. Because in my mind, a new script, my script, had already begun to take shape. And I wouldn't say a single word until the final act. That night, sleep was out of the question. I lay in our king-sized bed, feigning sleep, feeling the space between me and Preston stretch into a vast, icy canyon. Every time he shifted or sighed in his sleep, my entire body went rigid. He came to bed late, smelling of whiskey and his expensive shampoo, and was snoring softly within minutes. He always slept like a rock, especially after his Thursday night tennis game. I knew his routines as well as I knew my own financial models. I also knew that his right index finger was the key to unlocking his entire secret world. I waited. The minutes crawled by. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed in the dark, 1:45 a.m. 2:03 a.m. 2:17 a.m. The house was completely still, wrapped in the kind of deep silence that only happens in the dead of night. Moving with a slowness I didn't know I possessed, I slipped out of bed. The floorboards didn't make a sound. The air was cold on my bare arms. I picked up his phone from the nightstand. It felt heavy in my hand, heavy with secrets. I stood over him, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I was sure he would hear it. He was on his back, his mouth slightly open, a picture of innocence. A bitter, hot bile rose in my throat. This felt like a monumental betrayal of privacy, but then I remembered the text message, the casual cruelty of it, and the feeling vanished, replaced by cold resolve. Trust? He had burned that bridge and danced on the ashes. I gently took his right hand. It was warm and limp with sleep. I held my breath, my own hand trembling slightly as I guided his index finger towards the home button on the phone. I pressed it down. Click. The screen lit up, blinding me for a second in the darkroom. A chill crept down my spine, cold and sharp. My mission was simple: find out who she was, and who he was. The message about the pink lace set was just the tip of the iceberg. What I found was an entire secret life, a meticulously constructed world of lies he'd been living for what looked like at least 7 months. I scrolled through their messages, my stomach churning with a mixture of disgust and a strange, detached sense of purpose. I saw their pet names for each other. I saw the inside jokes that I wasn't a part of. I saw the pictures they exchanged, him, smiling at a bar I didn't recognize, her, a selfie in a car, her hair blowing in the wind. She was pretty, in a generic sort of way. Her name was Valerie. Valerie Donovan. A little digging in their messages revealed she was a sales rep for a medical device company, 35 years old, living in Tacoma. She wasn't some naive 20-something intern. She was a grown woman, a professional. And, as I soon discovered with a sickening lurch in my stomach, she was also married. I felt a new wave of nausea. This wasn't just a simple affair, it was a tangled web of deceit involving 4 people. I kept scrolling back, weeks, then months. I saw them planning their trysts at our cabin, the lake house that I had put the down payment on with my first big bonus, the house whose mortgage payments came directly from my salary. They talked about everything: work frustrations, complaining about their spouses in coded language, their favorite wines. They had a whole life together, a life built in the shadows of the ones they were supposed to be living with us. Then I found it. A message from a few months back. Tyler will be in San Jose all week. The cabin's all ours. Tyler. Her husband's name. My fingers flew across my own phone's keyboard, my breath held tight in my chest. A quick, quiet search gave me everything I needed. Tyler Donovan, 41 years old, a highly respected architect with his own firm, specializing in sustainable spaces. His professional profile picture showed a tall man with a kind, tired smile. He looked like a good man. A man who had no idea his wife was spending her weekends in another man's arms, in a house paid for by another woman. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat on the sofa downstairs, the glow of Preston's phone casting long shadows on the wall. The hurt was immense, a physical weight in my chest. But underneath the hurt, something else was growing. A cold, clear, calculating anger. I was a CFO. I dealt with betrayals of trust and cooked books for a living. I knew how to handle this. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to get organized. I was going to build a case. The next morning was one of the hardest performances of my life. I went through the motions like a ghost in my own home. I made coffee that I couldn't drink. I toasted a bagel that I couldn't eat. I sat across the kitchen island from Preston and pretended to read the news on my tablet. "Morning," he said, kissing the top of my head as he grabbed a mug. The gesture was so casual, so thoughtless, it made my skin crawl. "Morning," I replied, not looking up. The silence between us was thick with everything I now knew. He was oblivious, happily sipping his coffee, probably already thinking about his weekend with Valerie. I was a volcano of silent rage, my mind meticulously documenting every lie, every stolen moment. As soon as his car pulled out of the driveway, I flew into action. I sat down at my computer, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. My mind was a whirlwind of rage and pain, but my hands were steady. I was writing to a complete stranger, a man whose life I was about to turn upside down. What do you even say? How do you deliver a bomb like this? I wrote and rewrote the message at least 15 times. The first few drafts were angry, full of accusations. "Your wife is cheating on you with my husband." Too blunt. Then they were sad, full of apologies. "I am so sorry to have to tell you this," too weak. I paced my office, staring out at the gray Seattle sky. What was my objective? It wasn't to make a friend. It was to present a fact and propose a course of action. I needed to be a CFO. Finally, I deleted everything and wrote something simple, direct, and professional. It was the kind of communication I would use at work when dealing with a delicate financial matter that required discretion and immediate attention. Subject: a difficult but necessary conversation. Dear Mr. Donovan, my name is Audrey Miller. I am writing to you about a sensitive matter. I have reason to believe that my husband, Preston Miller, and your wife, Valerie Donovan, are having an affair. I have substantial evidence to support this, including text messages and plans for them to meet this upcoming weekend at my cabin on Lake Chelan. I understand this is a shocking and unwelcome message. If you are open to a conversation, I am willing to share what I know. My number is, phone number. Sincerely, Audrey Miller. My palms were soaked with sweat the moment I hit send. I felt a wave of nausea. What if he didn't believe me? What if he thought I was some crazy, jealous wife? What if he already knew and didn't care? For 3 hours, my phone sat on my desk like a ticking time bomb. Every notification from my work email made my heart leap into my throat. I tried to work, to focus on spreadsheets and projections for the museum project, but the numbers just swam in front of my eyes. It was useless. I just sat there, staring at the phone, waiting. Then, just after noon, it rang. An unknown number. I took a deep breath, let it ring twice to compose myself, and answered. This is Audrey. There was a pause on the other end, and then a deep, steady voice. This is Bennett Donovan. I got your email. His voice was strangely calm, but I could hear a subtle tremor beneath it, the sound of a man trying to hold his world together. Is this some kind of joke? I wish it were, I replied, my own voice hoarse. I truly do, Mr. Donovan. There was another long silence. I could hear him breathing, a ragged sound. Please, he said, his voice dropping. Call me Bennett. I decided to be direct, to lay out the facts like I would in a boardroom. Bennett. I have their text history from my husband's phone. I have photos. They've been planning this weekend at the lake for weeks. They're calling it their anniversary. The word hung in the air between us, ugly and sharp. I heard him exhale slowly, a sound filled with a weariness that I understood down to my bones. What do you want to do?" he asked, his voice strained. I gripped the phone tighter, the plan that had been forming in the back of my mind now coming into sharp focus. "He thinks I'm visiting my sister this weekend." "She thinks you're in San Jose," I said slowly, deliberately. "They're planning to be at my cabin on Saturday evening. What would you say to meeting them there? Before they even have a chance to uncork the wine." He didn't answer right away. I could almost feel his world tilting, just as mine had. I heard the faint sound of a chair creaking, as if he'd just sat down heavily. Then, finally, another long breath. "Okay," he said, the tremor in his voice gone, replaced by a hard, cold edge. "Okay, Audrey. Let's meet first. I want to see what you know." We agreed to meet Saturday morning at a small, anonymous diner in Ellensburg, a dusty, wind-blown town that served as a halfway point between Seattle and the lake. I arrived early, needing time to ground myself. I chose a booth in the back corner that faced the door, a strategic position born from years of business meetings. I ordered a black coffee and watched the minutes tick by on the wall clock, each one feeling like an hour. My stomach was in knots. I was about to share the most intimate, humiliating details of my marriage with a complete stranger. This felt surreal. It only took a single heartbeat to recognize him when he walked in. Bennett Donovan was tall, with a quiet strength about him. He wore a simple coat and had a stride that seemed to carry a heavy weight. His face matched his profile picture, tired, but with kind eyes that were now clouded with a deep, guarded pain that I recognized as my own. He slid into the booth across from me without any small talk. The waitress, a cheerful woman with a pen tucked behind her ear, came over. He just ordered a coffee, his eyes never leaving mine. "Thank you for meeting me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He just nodded, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "Let's just get this over with." "Show me." His directness was a relief. This wasn't a social call. This was a crisis meeting. I took out my phone, my hand steady now. I had spent all of Friday night taking screenshots of everything and organizing them into a folder, a grim testament to my efficiency even in the midst of heartbreak. I opened the message thread between Preston and Valerie and handed the phone across the sticky tabletop to him. I watched his face as he read. It was like watching a building crumble in slow motion. With every swipe of the screen, I saw his hand tighten around his coffee mug until his knuckles were white. I saw the color drain from his face. I saw the dawning horror in his eyes morph into a quiet, simmering rage. He was silent for a long time, just scrolling, reading, absorbing the sheer volume of their deceit, the pet names, the shared jokes, the blatant lies. Then he got to the photos. One of them was a picture Valerie had sent to Preston just last week. It was a close-up of her bare feet, toes painted a bright red, resting on the distinctive hardwood floor of the lake house. She had texted, "Can't wait to have my feet up on our floor again." Bennett stopped scrolling. He stared at the photo, his breath catching in his throat. He leaned back in the booth and closed his eyes. "That floor," he murmured, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite place, rage, pain, and a deep, personal sense of violation. "I designed that floor. I picked out the wood myself. It was a custom job for the original owner of that cabin, years ago. I remember the project. She knew that." He opened his eyes, and they were filled with a profound sense of betrayal that went beyond infidelity. This was a desecration. "I'm so sorry, Bennett," I said softly. He shook his head, waving away my apology. "It's not your fault. I thought it was just work. The long hours, the distance. She never wanted to see a counselor. Always said we were fine, just busy. Now I know why. He pushed the phone back towards me. We should probably talk to a lawyer. Figure out the next steps for a divorce. I've already spoken to mine, I admitted. She's on standby. We sat in silence for nearly an hour after that, two strangers bound by the same ugly secret. We talked about our marriages, not in detail, but in the broad, sad strokes of relationships that had faded without us realizing it. He talked about how he had poured his life into his architectural firm and how he had trusted Valerie completely. I talked about how I had focused on my career, on building a secure future, assuming Preston was right there beside me. We had both been fools, in our own way. Finally, he looked up from his empty coffee cup. I still have a spare key to the cabin, he said, his voice low and steady. From when I consulted on the remodel years ago. It's on an old keyring in my truck. She doesn't know I kept it. I nodded. Preston thinks I'm in Spokane this weekend, visiting my sister. He has no idea I'm anywhere near here. A look of cold resolve settled on Bennett's face. Then we'll get there first, he said, looking directly at me. But no yelling. No drama. He echoed the words I had been thinking myself. We just let them see us. Together. And let them face the truth. I tightened my grip on my coffee mug and nodded. The plan, born from the shattered pieces of our lives, was set. We weren't planning revenge. We were staging a reckoning. We agreed to meet at the cabin on Saturday afternoon. I spent the morning driving aimlessly through the gray, misty landscape of eastern Washington, my mind a blank. The pain was still there, a dull, constant ache in my chest, but it was overshadowed by a strange sense of purpose. I felt like I was an actress about to go on stage for the most important performance of my life. When I pulled up the long gravel driveway to the A-frame cabin nestled among the pine trees, Bennett's silver truck was already there. The air was cold and crisp, smelling of pine and damp earth. This place, this cabin, had once been my sanctuary. It was where Preston and I had spent our first anniversary, drinking cheap champagne and dreaming about our future. It was where we had talked about starting a family, picking out which small bedroom would be the nursery. It was also the place where, 3 years ago, I had suffered a second trimester miscarriage. A quiet, devastating loss that had hollowed me out for months. I remembered sitting on that very porch, wrapped in a blanket, while Preston held my hand and told me we'd get through it together. And now, my husband was bringing his mistress to the same sacred, scarred place. The thought was so vile, so deeply disrespectful, it made me want to be sick. Bennett was inside, holding a mug of coffee, staring out the large picture window at the still, gray water of the lake. He nodded as I walked in, a simple, familiar gesture, as if we weren't strangers at all. The house was cold, with the stale air of a place that's been closed up. "Did you sleep?" he asked, his voice low. "I'm not sure," I replied honestly, setting my bag down on a wooden chair. "Maybe for an hour." "You?" "No," he said. "But I'm used to it. Architects do their best work in the quiet of the night." He handed me a warm mug of coffee he'd already made. The simple kindness of it almost made my composure crack. We didn't talk much at first. We just existed in the space together, two ghosts in a house full of memories that were now tainted. Bennett walked around, lightly touching the walls, his designer's eye taking in the details. I watched him, and then I broke the silence. The last time I was here was after I lost the baby. Preston brought me here to recover. He said the quiet would be good for me. Bennett looked over at me, his eyes softening with an empathy that I hadn't received from my own husband in years. "I'm so sorry, Audrey," he said quietly. "Valerie, she wanted kids, too. Or so I thought. After a couple of years of trying with no luck, she just stopped bringing it up. I thought the grief was too much for her. Turns out, she just had other distractions. We weren't planning revenge, not in the screaming, plate-smashing way you see in movies. What we were doing felt more deliberate, more clinical. We started setting up the space, not as a trap, but as a staging of the truth. I went to the kitchen and wiped down the long wooden dining table, my movements precise. Bennett brought in a bottle of expensive red wine from his car, Valerie's favorite, according to her texts. He set it on the table. I went to the cabinet and took out 4 crystal wine glasses. The kind Preston always insisted on using, part of his arrogant, refined ritual. I polished each one until it gleamed. We arranged 2 chairs at the head of the table, facing the front door. We adjusted the lights to a warm, inviting amber, not bright enough to feel like an interrogation, but clear enough to see every flicker of emotion on their faces. On an armchair to the side, I placed the thick manila envelope. Inside was everything. Printed copies of the most damning text messages. Screenshots of Uber receipts from Preston's account. Credit card statements. And the final piece, a printout of an email from Preston's assistant, casually confirming to me that there was no company seminar in Portland this weekend. The CFO in me had left no stone unturned. How do you think they'll react? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, as we sat down in our designated chairs to wait. Bennett shook his head, his gaze fixed on the door. Valerie will cry. It's what she does when she's cornered. Preston. I don't know. Anger, maybe. Begging. But I guarantee you, he is not ready for the fact that both of us are here. That we know everything. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silent room. 5:45 p.m. 5:57 p.m. The air was tight, strung like a wire, ready to snap. My hands were cold, but my heart was steady. The wait was almost over. We heard it before we saw it. The distant crunch of tires on the gravel driveway, growing steadily louder. My heart leaped into my throat, a frantic bird beating against my ribs. Bennett looked at me from his chair across the table, a silent question in his eyes. Are you ready? I just nodded, my jaw set so tight it ached. This was it. A black SUV, Preston's car, pulled up to the steps. Through the large picture window, we watched as he stepped out first, looking handsome and carefree in a leather jacket. He opened the passenger door with a flourish, and Valerie stepped out. She was laughing at something he said, a bright, tinkling sound that made my stomach turn. He was holding a suitcase and a fancy gift bag. She was carrying a bouquet of pale pink tulips. They looked for all the world like a happy couple arriving for a romantic honeymoon retreat. The sight of it, the sheer, breathtaking audacity of bringing her here, to this place, sent a wave of hot, white anger through me that burned away the last of my fear. The key turned in the lock. The door swung open. Valerie entered first, her smile radiant. Oh, Preston, it's even more beautiful than I remember, she started to say, and then she saw us. She saw Bennett, sitting straight-backed and silent. She saw me, perched on the edge of my chair, my expression unreadable. Her smile didn't just fade, it froze, shattered on her face. Her breath hitched. Preston, not looking, bumped into her from behind. What's the hold-up, beautiful? Let's get this weekend star, he said, and then he looked up, following her horrified gaze. His eyes met mine. In that single, silent, terrible moment, his entire world, the carefully constructed world of lies and deceit, collapsed around him. He dropped the gift bag. A bottle of expensive champagne rolled out, hit the hardwood floor, and shattered with a loud, explosive pop. The smell of expensive champagne and shattered illusions filled the room, sharp and cloying. Valerie's mouth fell open in a silent "oh." The pink tulips slipped from her trembling hands, the petals scattering across the floor like a visual metaphor for what had just happened. An illusion, blown apart. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the fizzing of the spilled champagne on the floorboards that Bennett had designed. Preston stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. Valerie took half a step back, her eyes darting from me to Bennett, looking for an escape that wasn't there. I was the one who broke the silence. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I kept my voice light, almost conversational, which I knew would be more terrifying than screaming ever could be. "Welcome," I said, a small, cold smile playing on my lips. "You're just in time. We've prepared wine, chairs, and the truth." Preston stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, but no words came out. His carefully crafted performance was over, the curtain had been ripped away, and he was standing exposed on a stage he didn't even know had been set. The trap hadn't been sprung with a loud noise, but with a quiet, inescapable reality. We were here. We knew. And there was nowhere left to run. For a few seconds that stretched into an eternity, no one moved. It was like a tableau of betrayal, frozen in the warm amber light we had so carefully arranged. Then, Preston finally found his voice, and it was the weakest, most pathetic sound I had ever heard from him. "Audrey. Bennett, this isn't what you think." It was such a tired, insulting cliché that a harsh, humorless laugh escaped my lips. "Isn't it, Preston?" I tilted my head, keeping my voice as calm and sharp as a shard of glass. "Then what, exactly, am I supposed to think?" "I'm a CFO. I deal in facts and figures, so let's stick to those. Fact, I saw the texts planning this weekend. Fact, I know about the pink lace set. Fact, I have Uber receipts showing your late-night trips to her neighborhood at 2 in the morning. Are those facts not what I think they are?" He flinched at each point, each piece of data I laid out like a prosecutor in a courtroom. He had nothing. No rebuttal. No defense. Then Bennett stood up, and his tall frame seemed to fill the entire room. He wasn't yelling. His voice was steely, controlled, which was far more intimidating. "And what about me, Valerie? You said you were at a sales conference in Idaho. You sent me a picture of a PowerPoint slide. You even texted me good night, miss you an hour ago before turning off your phone. Was I imagining all of that, too?" Valerie finally broke, covering her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with ugly, gasping sobs. "Bennett, please don't." "Don't what?" He cut her off, his voice sharp and unforgiving. "Don't stand here in the house I helped design and watch my wife walk in with another man? Don't face the truth? Don't you dare ask me not to do this. You gave up the right to ask me for anything the second you started lying." I stood up and walked over to the armchair. I picked up the thick manila envelope and placed it on the dining table with a soft, definitive thud. "I didn't come here empty-handed," I said, my eyes locked on Preston. "I spent the last 48 hours doing what I do best, due diligence. Inside this envelope is your entire secret life, Preston. Phone records. Credit card statements detailing every hotel, every dinner you lied about. And my personal favorite, a sworn affidavit from a private investigator I hired 2 months ago, complete with photos, confirming your whereabouts. I needed to be sure before I blew up my life. And you were so careful. I had to be more careful." Preston's face, which had been pale, now turned a blotchy red. He snatched the envelope, ripped it open, and flipped through a few pages. His eyes, bloodshot with panic, scanned the damning evidence. The meticulous records. The dates that lined up perfectly with his business trips. He threw the papers down on the table as if they were on fire. "You were spying on me?" he hissed, finally finding a spark of anger. "I was performing a financial audit on my marriage," I corrected him calmly. "And the numbers didn't add up. Speaking of which, let's talk about finances, shall we? I find that money clarifies things beautifully." I turned my gaze to Valerie, whose face was streaked with tears. "Valerie, did Preston ever tell you why we keep our finances separate? Did he ever mention the $42,000 in gambling debt he racked up back in 2015? The debt his parents had to quietly pay off from their retirement fund to save his career? The secret that impacted our ability to get a decent mortgage until my own salary could carry the application?" Valerie stared at Preston, her mouth agape in genuine shock. "You never told me that." Because it has nothing to do with this. Preston snapped, cornered and flailing. Oh, it has everything to do with this, I said, my voice dropping, each word a carefully placed stone. You told her I was cold, that I was too focused on my work. But you forgot to mention that my work, my promotion, and my substantial salary are what pay the mortgage on this cabin. My money pays for this playground of yours, Preston. Every single month. While you've been lying about client dinners and secretly playing high-stakes poker with your old friends in Tacoma. Preston lowered his head, finally silent. The architect of lies had run out of blueprints. He had been exposed, not just as a cheater, but as a leech and a fool. The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. The only sound was Valerie's ragged breathing. Preston was defeated, staring at the floor, the picture of a man who had lost everything and knew it was his own damn fault. I thought we had reached the end of the revelations. I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. Just as the weight of all the lies seemed to settle over the room, to crush us all, Valerie suddenly stood up. She used the back of a chair to steady herself, her knuckles white. Her eyes were red and swollen, but as she looked from Bennett to me, there was something else in them. A desperate, terrified glint. There's something else, she said, her voice shaking so badly it was barely a whisper. Something I haven't said. Bennett turned to her, his face a mask of pure exhaustion. He looked like a man who had been in a battle for days. What now, Valerie? What else could there possibly be? She swallowed hard, her throat working. Her eyes flickered nervously from Bennett to Preston, and then, strangely, they landed on me. She took a shaky breath, as if steeling herself for one last, desperate confession. I'm pregnant. The 3 words dropped into the silent room like a stone into a perfectly still lake, the ripples of shock spreading out to touch every one of us. The ticking of the wall clock suddenly seemed deafeningly loud, each second slicing through the air like a razor blade. Preston shot up from his chair, his face a cartoon of disbelief. What? What did you just say? Valerie nodded, her lips trembling, fresh tears welling in her eyes. I found out last week. I was going to tell you this weekend, Preston. That was supposed to be what this weekend was for. A celebration. The word celebration was so absurd, so grotesquely out of place, that I felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in my chest, but I choked it down. For a moment, my mind went completely blank. A baby. None of my research, none of my meticulously organized evidence folders, had prepared me for this. This wasn't a variable I had accounted for. This was a grenade. Bennett stood frozen, his face ashen, looking like he'd been physically struck. His voice, when it came, was barely audible, a ghost of a sound. Is the baby mine? Valerie's eyes, full of tears, finally turned to her husband. Yes, she whispered, her voice cracking with a desperate sincerity. Yes, Bennett, I'm sure. Preston and we were always careful. It's yours. I looked at Preston. He looked like he'd been struck by lightning. The furious, cornered expression on his face dissolved into something unrecognizable, a mixture of shock, humiliation, and complete, hollow emptiness. He had been playing the part of the romantic lead in his own fantasy, the man for whom a woman would leave her husband. And he had just been demoted to a disposable side character in a much more serious drama. The thought gave me a grim, cold satisfaction. The air was thick with this new, complicated reality. A baby. An innocent life brought into the world from a foundation of secrets and lies. The drama had just escalated to a level none of us had anticipated. And I stood there, watching the fallout, the only one in the room whose future suddenly felt starkly, terrifyingly clear. The news of the pregnancy hung in the air, a shocking plot twist in a play none of us wanted to be in. For a moment, everyone was paralyzed by the sheer weight of it. Everyone but me. While they were all reeling from the emotional shrapnel, my path forward, which had been clear before, now became a non-negotiable imperative. This wasn't my circus. These weren't my monkeys. I took a deep, centering breath. The cold air in my lungs was a welcome shock, pulling me out of the haze. I walked over to my handbag, which I had placed neatly on a side chair when we first arrived. My movements were calm, deliberate. I opened it and pulled out a small, crisp folder, the second one I had brought with me. I placed it on the table next to the scattered papers of Preston's affair. "Looks like we've all had enough for one day," I said, my eyes locked on Preston. His face was a pale, slack mask of shock. "And since we're putting all the cards on the table, I won't drag this out." I pushed the folder towards him. It slid across the smooth wood and stopped directly in front of him. "This," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion, as cool and clear as the lake water outside, "is the divorce petition. It's already been filed with the court. You'll be served officially by a courier at your office on Monday morning. Inside, you'll also find all the financial documentation I've prepared. I've already had a forensic accountant go through our assets for the last 5 years. Everything has been verified by my lawyer. I have nothing to hide. Can you say the same?" Preston just stared at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. He didn't respond. He couldn't. "You can review it, you can fight it, you can refuse to sign it," I continued calmly, laying out the terms of my surrender from this war. "But my decision is made. I have instructed my lawyer to be as aggressive as necessary. This marriage is over." Valerie had collapsed back into her chair, her hand instinctively going to her stomach, a protective gesture that was probably the only honest thing she'd done all day. Bennett, after a long, frozen moment in which he seemed to age 10 years, finally turned to her. His voice was low but controlled, the voice of a man making a painful but necessary decision. "I'll need time to process all of this," he said, not looking at her directly but at a point on the wall just past her shoulder. "But if you're keeping the baby, I'll be there. The child isn't at fault here. We'll have to discuss custody, and we will both need a good lawyer." Valerie nodded, choking back fresh tears. "I know. Thank you for still being able to say that." I looked at Preston, who finally raised his head. His eyes were red and weary, and for the first time, they were filled with a desperate, genuine panic. "Audrey," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "All of this, it's not worth ending everything over. We had so many good things. Don't throw it all away." "You're right," I nodded, and for a second, a flicker of insane hope crossed his face. "We had so many good things. We had youth, and laughter, and dreams. We had the memory of the child we lost in this very house. But the fact that you chose to trade all of that away for a cheap, sordid thrill with someone who was also lying to her own husband, that means you threw it all away, Preston." "Not me. I'm just cleaning up the mess." I picked up my handbag and my car keys. This was it. The end of the scene. The end of my marriage. I had walked into this cabin a betrayed wife. I was walking out as a free woman. I turned and walked toward the door, not looking back. Bennett followed a moment later, leaving Preston and Valerie alone in the wreckage they had created. If you're still listening to my story, if you've followed me on this journey into that cabin, could you do me a huge favor? Please like this video, and just comment the number 1 down below. It lets me know that you're here with me, that you're listening. Your support means the world to me, and it gives me the strength to keep going. Just comment the number 1, and let me tell you what happened next. Stepping out of that cabin and into the cold, crisp evening air felt like taking my first breath after being underwater for too long. The silence of the forest was a welcome relief after the emotional storm inside. The scent of pine and damp earth was clean and real. Bennett and I walked to our cars without saying a word. There was nothing left to say. The performance was over, and we were just 2 exhausted actors leaving the stage. He opened my car door for me, a small, old-fashioned gesture of courtesy that felt strangely comforting in the midst of all the ugliness. Before I got in, he paused, leaning against the frame of the door. "Are you going to be okay to drive?" he asked, his voice rough with exhaustion. I nodded, looking out at the dark silhouette of the trees against the twilight sky. "I'm better than okay, Bennett. I'm free." He managed a small, tired smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He looked utterly broken, but there was a strength in him, too. He got into his own truck, but before starting the engine, he rolled down his window. "I don't know about you," he said, his voice hesitant, "but I haven't eaten all day. My stomach feels like one big knot. I know a little diner in Chelan that stays open late. Nothing fancy, but their chicken soup is decent. And their coffee is strong." To my own surprise, I laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh, but it was real. A genuine, hoarse, unexpected sound that started deep in my chest. It felt foreign, but wonderful. "Yeah," I said, my voice lighter than it had been in years. "Let's eat. I'm starving." We sat side by side in a worn vinyl booth at the diner, the kind of place with checkered floors and a jukebox in the corner. The warm yellow light cast a gentle glow over the table. The place smelled of coffee and fried onions, a comforting, normal smell that was a world away from the tension and expensive perfume of the cabin. We didn't talk about what had just happened. We didn't analyze it, didn't rehash the betrayals. It was as if we had both silently agreed to leave it behind us, locked in that house on the lake. We were both too raw, too tired. Instead, we talked about quieter things. He told me he'd once considered quitting architecture to go to pastry school in Paris. He described in detail the perfect croissant, and for 5 minutes, I was completely lost in his story. I told him I had a half-finished manuscript for a novel tucked away in a drawer, a story about a female detective in the 1940s. It was a dream I'd let go of after Preston had once casually called it unrealistic during a dinner party. "A novel? Honey, who has time for that?" he'd said with a laugh. Hearing myself say it out loud to Bennett, I realized how cruel and belittling that comment had been. We were two strangers, really. Thrown together by the worst circumstances imaginable. But that night, we were the only two people on the planet who understood exactly what the other was going through. We didn't become lovers. There wasn't a spark of romance. We didn't even become close friends, not in the traditional sense. But in that diner, over bowls of hot soup and mugs of black coffee, we became something just as important. We were allies. Survivors of the same shipwreck, washed up on the same deserted shore. After dinner, we said goodbye in the chilly parking lot with a simple handshake and a quiet nod. "Take care of yourself, Audrey," he said, his eyes full of a sad, knowing understanding. "You too, Bennett." As I drove away, back towards my old life in Seattle that I now knew I would be dismantling piece by piece, I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel angry. I just felt quiet. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt hopeful. I had walked through the fire, and I had come out the other side. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, it felt like it was mine to choose. The 6 months that followed were a blur of lawyers, paperwork, and the emotionally draining task of packing up a decade of my life into cardboard boxes. The divorce, as it turned out, was surprisingly swift and clean. My meticulous preparation had paid off. When Preston's lawyer saw the mountain of evidence I had, the private investigator's report, the financial statements, the proof of his gambling debts, there wasn't much to fight about. He knew a drawn-out court battle would only expose more of Preston's dirty laundry. He signed the papers. I got the house, the majority of our joint assets, and a one-time buyout for his share of the lake cabin, which I immediately put on the market. I didn't need a place filled with ghosts. The last I heard, Preston had taken a significant pay cut to move to a different division in his company, a lateral move that was essentially a demotion. News like that has a way of getting out. His affair had cost him more than just his marriage, it had cost him his career trajectory. I sold the big, cold, modern house in Seattle and all the minimalist furniture that came with it. The closing day felt like a weight being lifted off my shoulders. I used the money to buy a small, charming cottage by the sea in Port Townsend. It was a quiet little town, a world away from the hustle of the city, with salty air and the sound of foghorns in the distance. I also quit my high-pressure CFO job. The stress, the long hours. I realized I had been using it as an escape from my unhappy marriage. Now that the marriage was gone, I didn't need the escape anymore. I started my own freelance financial consulting business, working from a small office that looked out over the water. My clients were mostly small business owners and women like me, women starting over. My salary was smaller, but my life was infinitely richer. One day, about 5 months after that awful night at the cabin, I got a text from Bennett. It was a photo. A tiny baby's hand, with perfect little fingernails, wrapped around a woman's finger. The caption read, "Nora's here. 7 pounds 2 ounces healthy girl. Emotions are all over the place, but we're trying." I smiled, a real, genuine smile. I didn't know if he and Valerie were back together as a couple, or if they were just trying to navigate the complicated waters of co-parenting. It didn't matter. It was clear they were learning how to be honest with themselves and each other, even if it was late in the game. I texted him back, "She's beautiful, Bennett. Congratulations. You'll be a great dad. We still keep in touch. Not often, but consistently." A text on Thanksgiving. A random message, "Saw a little French-style cabin in Oregon, made me think of you." Or a 15-minute call just to ask, "Are you doing okay?" We had walked through one of the longest nights of our lives together. We were friends. The kind of friends that don't need labels or constant communication, just the quiet understanding that the other person is out there, surviving too. This morning, I woke up early, not because of an alarm clock for a 7 a.m. meeting, but because the seagulls were making a racket outside my window and I wanted to watch the sunrise. I sat on my small wooden porch, wrapped in a warm, knitted blanket, holding a cup of hot tea. I watched the sky turn from a deep, bruised purple to a soft pink, and then to a brilliant, hopeful gold over the calm water of the bay. My heart no longer felt heavy. I no longer felt like the woman who was left behind. Preston had been a significant part of my world, but he wasn't the destination. He was a painful, expensive lesson. He taught me that trust, once shattered, can never be truly whole again. He taught me that blind sacrifice only makes you forget your own worth. For years, I had tried so hard to be the perfect wife, successful at work, gentle at home, forgiving of his flaws, always smoothing things over. And in return, I got a marriage hollowed out by betrayal and contempt. Did it hurt? Of course. The pain was immense, a physical presence that lived in my chest for months. But the pain no longer drowns me. It was a storm that washed me back to shore. It brought me here, to this little house by the sea, to this quiet, peaceful life that is entirely, blessedly my own. I saw Preston one last time, a few months ago, at a financial charity event in Seattle I'd agreed to attend. He stood across the crowded room, holding a glass of wine, watching me. He looked different, thinner, quieter, with a sadness in his eyes I'd never seen before. He approached me hesitantly as I was leaving. "Audrey," he said softly. "You look well." "Happy." "I am well, Preston," I replied, and I was surprised by how much I meant it. There was no anger left, just a kind of pity. I wanted to say I'm sorry, he said, looking down at his expensive shoes. For everything. I smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached my eyes. I know. But you don't have to say it anymore. That's the past. That belongs to a different woman. And I've chosen to live in the present. He just nodded and stepped back, letting me pass. And for the first time, I saw him not as the great love of my life, or the monster who betrayed me, but just as a small, sad man who had made a series of bad choices and had lost his way. Now, my days are filled with simple things. I have pots of lavender and rosemary on my porch. I've started writing my novel again, the one about the detective. I offer financial counseling for women going through a divorce, not as a cold expert spouting numbers about college funds and assets, but as someone who has lived it. They trust me because they know I understand the gut-wrenching fear and the dizzying freedom that comes with starting over. My story isn't a tragedy. It's a journey of rebirth. I don't regret anything. Because I've learned that some people come into our lives not to stay, but to teach us how to leave at the right time. I learned how to stand back up, to heal, and to love myself again. And that, I think, is the best kind of happily ever after. Thank you for listening to my story. It means so much to me to be able to share it. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories. Take care of yourselves.